Today, we are joined by our Gamma Phi Beta sister from Alma College, Epsilon Beta chapter, Mallory Montgomery. Mallory is a board-certified art therapist, clinical trauma professional, and artist. In addition to her clinical role, Mallory is extremely active in mental health advocacy in her pursuits of working within state legislature to expand access to vital services for underserved communities. Please join us in welcoming Mallory to the show. Mallory, hello.
Welcome.
Welcome to True Concert.
So excited to be talking with you tonight.
Yes, well, we are absolutely thrilled to have you. You are in such an interesting and important line of work. So I can't wait to kind of pick your brain and get to learn a little bit more about what you do, how you got into it, and what you hope for the future is for mental health access. So to begin with, you are in a very, very heavy line of work. It is a tough area, to say the least. What drew you to being a therapist and specializing in such a challenging area of trauma?
That is one of the questions I get frequently because I do such heavy lifting. I had a fabulous teacher in high school who looked at 16-year-old me, and I was dead set on being an artist, starving or otherwise. I was taking her psychology class, and I think she saw something in me that resonated with her. She recommended that I combine my talents for her coursework with my talents for art and suggested that I look into art therapy. And unexpectedly later that summer, she ended up passing from surgical complications. And I thought about what she said again. That set me on a course to find a university that had an excellent psychology and arts program, which is how I ended up at Alma. And then after that, I went to Wisconsin and pursued my master's in art therapy and clinical counseling. Trauma was something that I didn't expect to fall in love with. And it's weird to say that I fell in love with trauma psychology, but there is such a high reward for watching individuals grow and knowing that you are there to honor their journey through some of the hardest moments of their life. So when I did my internships in graduate school, I only seemed to pick trauma classes. Ended up loving the work, and after I graduated, landed my first job in inpatient psychiatry. Now I work in domestic violence recovery.
Wow, definitely very, very important and needed areas for sure.
I love the inspiration, sort of like that this person early in your life sort of like influenced your path forward, and that now you're helping influence the lives of other people in turn. I'd be curious, Mallory, to hear what your definition of art therapy is. So for our listeners who maybe like know what therapy is, What is the art component here? Like, what does art therapy look like in practice?
Absolutely. So art therapy is a clinical lens that is a separate profession from counseling or social work, although we absolutely share similar qualities in therapeutic training. A lot of individuals who have trauma have vast difficulty expressing themselves through talk therapy alone. When a client comes to see me where I work, I have a variety of art supplies that are at a beginner's level. And instead of just using talking in our work together, we use the art materials as a healing process for emotional exploration, catharsis. A lot of my clients find that what we do together using art and talking gets them to a deeper place of healing faster than just talking about it alone.
Beautiful. I thought it was like such a perfect, succinct description. I love that. I saw also in your bio that you use the word holistic to describe the work that you do. I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about like what that means for you and your practice as it relates to art therapy.
Absolutely. When I am working with a client, I am working with the entire person sitting across from me, all of their intersectional identities, all of their intersectional traumas. And when a person is working on healing a specific trauma, we tend to find that other things pop up along the way. When I'm utilizing art as the healing modality, this gives us space to explore and create a visual narrative from their whole entire therapeutic journey. So we might start them off with something like emotion identification, and then eventually we're working up into drawing or creating some kind of visual trauma narrative. So this accounts for a person's entire human experience. We might be having spiritual discussions, racial discussions. We might be looking at their trauma through an early childhood lens and how early childhood trauma impacts the trauma they incurred later in life. So when I say holistic, I really do mean I make each individual person sitting across from me as client-centered as I can be, and downplay the power of myself as a therapist and elevate them and remind them of the power that they inherently have.
That's very cool. Yeah, I mean, there's so many complexities, and I truly feel like everyone has encountered some trauma in their life, right? There's big T trauma, which are things where, that are life-threatening, things are in danger. And then there's little T trauma, right? Those sort of building up moments of stress factors and challenges. And so I think that we all have this I feel like we could all benefit from sort of addressing some of these issues and healings in our life. And one thing I think is really interesting is that sort of narrative, taking back your narrative in trauma therapy. What are some little tips from that sort of modality that anyone can incorporate into their life?
Trauma is a total body experience. It affects every aspect of our being, not just our mental health, also our physical health. When I'm working with an individual and we're focusing on the process of art being healing, it is a profound way to just connect all of those pieces that perhaps are in dissonance. Any type of art counts toward this. While I specialize in visual arts, there are other creative arts therapists who use other forms of expression. So individuals might find themselves drawn to dance movement therapy, music therapy, or creative visual arts therapy. A lot of people get stuck in this idea of, I have to be an artist in order to use this to heal. And we want to reframe that. So that way we're talking about the process of creation, getting in touch with what our mind, body, spirit are trying to communicate with each other. So it doesn't really matter what the art looks like. It can be as simple as a coloring sheet, but that activation of our whole being through dance, through music, through songwriting, through visual arts, that's a key component of healing trauma, working through the body and through the emotions to help ease the mental fatigue and the pain that people are carrying.
Yeah, I think that was one of my bigger questions that even I had in mind in terms of what art therapy looks like. I think that art, it's maybe not everyone is a natural born artist, and that can be very intimidating to go, yes, start doing this, start creating. And some of that, maybe self-criticism comes up, or maybe people enjoy something and they're like, oh, I'm going to take a class. And then there's, critical feedback there. What would you say to people who are overcoming either their own voice or other people's voice in terms of the act of creation?
This is something I tell my clients who are perhaps art resistant at first. And it comes from a developmental theory in art therapy where around the age of 11 to 13, children are starting to become very self-aware and very self-critical. So there are 2 or 3 possible things that could happen in this period. If you have a child at this tender age whose parents never discourage them and they seem to enjoy what they're doing and nobody tells them to stop, they don't stop. And that's how you get artists, as we call it in society. You might also get, on the opposite side, parents who know their child enjoys art, but don't find it to be a viable career path. So as they're entering late middle school and early high school and starting to think about their future, they are discouraged from making art or having art classes and instead encouraged to focus on other academics and extracurriculars that could take them the extra mile. And then there's a third branch where this client is so self-comparative that they look at their peers who are not told no, don't do art, and who perhaps go home and shirk off their homework and make art instead. Now they're looking and comparing. I'm not as good as Jane, so therefore I need to stop. Now, when you come into my clinical space and I'm working with you and you stopped yourself at the age of 11 or 12, it can be very freeing to have this conversation of, you don't need to be perfect. You stopped your artistic development at this age. I don't expect you to draw like I have, because I've been making art for probably 25, 26 years of my life. So that education piece that comes into play, reminding them that it's the process of art being enjoyable, freeing, cathartic, and expressive, that helps bring that back for them. But that is a conversation I have to have, especially with individuals who did stop or put themselves down, or their parents' voice or their own voice said, enough of that, we're not going to keep going.
Yeah, I love that so much. I'm actually going to turn this question to both you, Emma, and Mallory, because you both come from trauma-informed backgrounds. What does inner child work mean? Because I heard you use that word. I've heard the word a lot. What can you tell our listeners about what inner child work means? And then how does that maybe show up in things like therapy?
Go for it, Mallory.
Okay, got it. I teach my supervisees, and I espouse the belief that inner child work isn't just about going back to toddler you. Sometimes that's what gets put out on social media platforms, of this little version of you, and that can be very helpful. But there's also 12-year-old you and 16-year-old you and 18-year-old you, any age prior to your brain fully developing, which is around 25 in women and 32 in men. So
Wow.
if we are going farther back in our histories, it's not just the little toddler that didn't get their needs met, whether that was attention, affection, or full-on neglect. It is also other areas and stages of your life that need attention. There is also this teaching that I hope phases out of master's level education soon, that we can only work on the behaviors that present themselves in the here and now. Mm. And I don't feel like that's a very human experience. A lot of our aches and pains and traumas exist farther back than that. And so to discount those is not coming from a trauma-informed lens or a healthy trauma treatment plan. When I'm working with individuals, we go all the way back as far as they can to the things that are bothering them and give them room, space, and attention to heal. Because if you're still carrying that wound 25, 30, 40 years later and it never healed, we can't keep ignoring it and expect to have progress.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible definition. And it ties in with the knowledge that trauma isn't linear and it doesn't have to happen, X, Y, Z. You can feel things that happened at every which way point. So I love that philosophy, Mallory, that, taking whatever is presenting, whatever wound that is. And it's kind of, I think you can see patterns, right? And I think that that's what's cool too about the developmental aspect of it is maybe you did experience something really far back in childhood, but it showed up in a different way in your teen years. So I think that I like that perspective in terms of inner child work, paying attention to what that need is, giving it space, and sort of readjusting some of the healing. And yeah, incorporating some of those things that you used to love when you were younger. I think that's a huge part of it. Getting in touch with that one phase, that one speck of time of who you were in your existence.
Yeah, I love that. Mallory, I'd love to shift gears just a little bit and talk to you about your art. Can you tell us more about what you do, what mediums you work with, and how art came into your life?
I honestly can't remember a time in my life where art was not a part of it in some way, shape, or form. Um, I love multiple kinds of art, and not just in the visual sense. I have been a member of various choirs and singing since I was 5 years old. And when I was at Alma, I was in their touring choir and went all over the United States and did a semester in Scotland singing. That is a huge part of my life and self-expression. I was involved in various dance companies, just for social fun, not that I was ever, going to be a prima ballerina, but all the way up through grad school, taking dance classes and enjoying moving my body in a way that felt great. And I enjoy writing, and I'm attempting to gear myself up to write a full-fledged novel. So those are the, I know, those are the non-visual arts. But in my visual arts, I spend a lot of time making art that takes a deeper look into various historical female myths and legends.
Ooh.
So I know. So I draw figure drawings of various goddesses, historical figures, just really trying to connect with this sense of femalehood, identity, and what it means to be a woman absent of the male gaze. I also spend time doing ceramics and have my own kiln and wheel that my husband so generously gifted me. And I do a lot of painting oil, pastel, gouache, watercolor, and acrylic. So I do a little bit of all of it, but I think painting, drawing, and ceramics are my favorite.
That's amazing.
That's so cool. That is so many different mediums. I am just like totally mind blown right now at all that you're even capable of. I think part of me is just like, oh, I could maybe like try one or two of those things, let alone like actually do it and live it. What advice would you give someone who is just like, I know that, yeah, it would be really cool and healing and helpful, but I don't know where to begin. Like I am way too overwhelmed. Do you have any advice for where to start in terms of figuring out what you're drawn to?
Giving yourself permission to fail is the most important part of art. I have sketchbooks and sketchbooks and sketchbooks and Pinterest saves galore. And when I'm drawing something, I give myself permission to do that same drawing over and over and over again. With ceramics, it's just mud. It really is. It's just mud. And if the mud doesn't work out, it will become mud again until baked. So
I love that.
Getting into the arts when we're little is just about joy. Children learn through play and through exploration, through art and movement. They don't learn very well by sitting in a classroom and absorbing lecture. That's why so many classrooms have activities for children to learn through and hands-on experiences for them to learn through. But when we look at the various arts, just give yourself permission to get back to when you were young and you could take a wonky circle and put it on a wonky rectangle and you drew some stripes on it and you called it a tiger and your parents hung that tiger on the fridge. They probably would have left tiger on the fridge for years and years and years until you learned to be ashamed because it didn't truly look like a tiger. So shedding shame, giving yourself permission to fail, those are such important aspects to being an artist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. One of the things I heard you mention in your own art was like the woman expression, right? Women's stories and taking the male gaze out of it. Tell us a little bit more about that. Because I actually, in addition to creating art, I feel like sometimes consuming it is really healing too.
Mm-hmm,
like
totally.
there are books that I've read or even pictures I've looked at or music I've listened to where it's like, wow, this is really healing. So yeah, I'm curious about what you pursue in terms of that.
This passion project really started, I think, my junior year in college, where I was also an art history minor. Alma really loves students that are overly involved. And when I was learning about the male gaze and learning about how narrative in the world is shaped through art and our consumption of art, I got really mad. And I said, I don't want to make art based on the influence of a supposed third party. I want this art to be between me and what the subject wants to see. So I invited people to send me pictures of themselves where they felt strong, empowered, and just recreated that in my artistic style. My passion for novels, reading, history, art history in particular, then means that I have a lot of useless Jeopardy knowledge about historical women and historical non-traditional gender roles like Joan of Arc. And that process and engaging with those stories and then turning them into a visual that is not about the men in the story or not about the power dynamics of patriarchy in the story. It focuses on the individual and how I would hope history would end up perceiving them instead of what actually happened. How many times have you seen a picture of Medusa, but it's just her head?
Oh, yeah. What a ponder. That's so true.
Absolutely. Yeah, I never really considered that. And that is really the only iconography that you can consume of Medusa is just the head, which is like the very end of her story, right?
Yes, after she's been attacked and beheaded by a man as the result of a male god interfering in her life.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I'm curious, we talked with, ironically, an author who we should maybe connect you with if you're working on a novel. We should get you in touch with Shelley.
Shelley, so much. When we knew we were talking about you, I was like, wow, I feel like there are some parallels for sure.
Absolutely. But in our conversation with Shelley, it was interesting because she talked about like the title of author, and what that sort of meant to like take that on and accept the title of being an author. I think artists also feel something very similar where it can be very difficult to like own the title of calling yourself an artist or a writer. So what does it mean to you, Mallory, to call yourself an artist?
It's so funny that you asked me that because I was sitting in my art studio making something and second guessing it and was like, am I really an artist? And those thoughts come up because I think we're living in a comparative culture and there is always somebody who does a different style of art, writing, music than you that you perhaps admire or put on a pedestal. And so for me, being an artist means I get to express my ideas and my view of the world or view of certain parts of the world with a non-verbal lens. I don't have to be particularly good at it. I don't have to sell it. I don't have to market it and go to galleries and accept critique. I can make it just because it feels good. I'm proud of it. And it brings me so much joy to create. That's the whole point of being any kind of artist, no matter your medium.
Yeah, I think that the finding joy and is a huge part and actually doing it. I think there's so many people that just plan things in their head and they'd never put the pen to paper or hands on the mud ceramic or whatever. And, I think it's really brave to just go out there and to make it. And that is the first step in doing it. You can be theoretical that you want to be something, but as soon as you start doing it, even if it does have that permission to fail and take some turns, I think you're absolutely right that you're there. But speaking of finding joy, something you said along those lines kind of reminded me of a question I have about your particular experience in your line of work, especially as an art therapist in healing trauma. When you're training and when you're studying to become a clinician, sometimes it's just inundation of the word self-care, 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 to the point where it almost means nothing. And one of those ways is absolutely like finding joy in art. But what would you say? And sometimes, yeah, self-care just goes by your head and you're like, yeah, I'm doing it, whatever. What would you say is some of the most unusual advice that you've gotten in your years of practicing in terms of self-care?
The thing that stuck out to me, and I don't remember which of my great predecessors I learned this from, so apologies, I don't recall, but I was introduced about probably 4 or 5 years ago to the idea that happiness is an extreme emotion. And what I mean by that is that a human being's normal day to day tends to be some type of calm, neutral, or bored.
Right.
So when I am working with a client and they say, I just want to be happy, and we start to have that conversation of what does joy look like to you? How do you find joy? It's usually something big, like I'm going out on a vacation, I'm doing this grand gesture, or I'm treating myself. And we start to reframe that and say, are you missing opportunities for happiness in the day to day? Mindfulness is a practice that also gets tossed around a lot with self-care.
Yep.
And the general like vibe on social media of mindfulness is just look at the sky and notice the sky is blue. And that's not actually what we teach our clients in a clinical setting. The point of mindfulness is taking stock of where we are and how we feel without trying to change it and without judging ourselves for having an emotion. As soon as we start to free up space for negative emotions to breathe, we start to notice a lot more positivity and shift our mindset naturally. We're not so hung up on trying to keep bad thoughts away or ignore them. They are just chemicals. They will pass. And then I will notice other chemicals that make me feel better.
Hi, listeners. I'm Jessica Budjanowski, and welcome to our True Connection segment. It's your source for Gamma Phi Beta information, special stories of our sisterhood, and tools to get you involved. Now, today, you're hearing from Mallory Montgomery, who's sharing her passion for supporting others and making a positive impact in her community. That's just like Gamma Phi Beta. Our sisterhood offers ways to support one another as collegians and as alumni. Membership in Gamma Phi Beta is for a lifetime, and as an alumna member, you strengthen our sisterhood by remaining connected to the sorority through engagement and mentorship. There are several ways that you can get involved as an alumna. You can support a local collegiate chapter, you could join an alumni chapter, or you could even volunteer at the international level. Alumni chapters are really our lifeline to continued connections. And if there's not a local alumni chapter in your area, there are several online social network groups that you can join. Now, if you are not a member of the Gamma Phi Beta sorority, did you know that we have an alumni initiate program? Well, Gamma Phi Beta welcomes qualified women who have never attended college, or maybe you attended a school without a sorority community, or maybe you never became an initiated member of a national Pan-Hellenic Conference sorority while you were in college. Well, you too could join our sisterhood. For more information about how to get involved with your local alumni chapter, or maybe how to become an alumni initiate, visit gammaphibeta.org/alumni engagement. I'm Jessica Budjanowski. Let's keep connected until next time. Now back to your conversation with Mallory.
You really only feel a feeling for a few minutes, honestly, and it does transition. It's amazing how fast it has the ability to transition. Not in every case. There's obviously clinical disorders where moods happen differently, but yeah, it's amazing to just take it in for what it is without that piece of judgment.
And giving yourself permission to not do anything with it. You can just be with your feeling, and you don't have to solve it. You don't have to do anything other than give it some breathing room.
Yeah, I think that maybe this is a generational thing, maybe this is a person to person thing, but I think that, from my experience growing up, at least, it seemed like things just had to be fixed. Like you just have to fix this emotion and, make it better, make it better. But you're right. I think that leaving that space, and just being is so powerful.
I'm curious. We've sort of like talked about both your art therapy background and then also your work as an artist. What does it mean for you to like hold both of those spaces, right? Like as someone who's working with people, who's navigating life through art or processing things through art, and then to also do that for yourself to a degree. What does that look like in terms of like how you balance both of these parts of your identity?
The easiest way to say it is I have extremely rock solid boundaries, but that is so much more nuanced. Because I do make art for the point of being consumed and to tell a visual story, and I want it to look a certain way. And that is a whole separate hat than the hat that I wear at work, where I can kind of turn that on and turn that off. I do my best to not take my work home with me, which isn't always going to happen. But in my overlap, it's giving myself the permission to fail and to explore, especially if the art is just supposed to be joyful and just supposed to be there to help me get through a tough day. It's not the only thing that I turn to, but I definitely am very good at saying, all right, therapist Mal is staying at work. I'm going to leave her when I shut the door. And then I come home. And like today I was making some watercolor thank you cards. My staff have been tremendous in supporting each other. So I wanted to thank them. And the best way that I know how to thank them is just to make them something. So I want that to look a particular way. And I'm looking at it with a more critical lens. At the same time, there's a little voice in the back of my head that says, they're going to love this no matter what, because you took the time to make something to say thank you. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of that boundary work, giving myself the same permission I give my clients. But then I also balance that out with when I need to turn the artist critique lens on, we can. Not all the time, but sometimes.
Wow, boundaries. That is a big word. That is, I think, a thing that a lot of people have a lifetime journey working on. What would you describe boundaries as, a boundary? And what are some, short, attainable steps people can use to start the journey of enforcing their boundaries a little bit more in daily life?
Boundaries are only something we can control. So if you, Emma, did something that bothered me, if we were friends in our day-to-day, I would not ask you, hey, this bothers me and you're bothering me. I can only make a boundary around something that I can control, which is a very weird, paradoxic, people want to be kind to each other and people want to accommodate each other. And yet I'm only responsible for my own behaviors. I'm only responsible for my own existence. So if I communicate with you and you decide that is something you can accommodate in our friendship, fabulous. But that's not always going to be the case. So a boundary is something that we choose, we stick to ourselves, and we hold ourselves accountable for the spaces and choices that we need. In trauma work in particular, our brains tend to generalize. So if the car that hit your car was the color blue, you might generalize all color blue triggers a traumatic response. A boundary is then not asking you to paint your office a different color. That's learning to move through the uncomfortable and really take stock of what can I control and what I can control is me. I can't control other people. I can use the block function. I can leave a room. I cannot expect other people to alter their behavior if they're not ready for change.
And that they're adjustable too, that,
oh, yes.
Yeah, that they can change.
Boundaries are fluid, and it's the same thing as consent. Consent is ongoing and can be taken back at any time. Boundaries are ongoing and can be changed, flexed, or modified at any time.
That is such a great comparison for sure.
I'm curious, Mallory, can you tell us a little bit more about what some of these boundaries look like in your day-to-day? So you mentioned sort of like leaving therapist Mallory at work. What does that actually look like in practice? I'd love to like contextualize this for listeners and like what that actually looks like in your day-to-day.
It's something that is a skill that is taught. It is not a skill anyone is necessarily born with. We go through life learning various lessons, and so is true when you're going through learning how to become a clinician, learning how to be a therapist. Part of our training and our coursework is not just learning about ethics, but how they're applied. And the reason that there are policies, procedures, and ethics is because they not only keep the client safe, but they keep the clinician safe too. So on one hand, this is something that you go to school for and you learn how to do, but it's also something that you have to put into practice every day. Our gift as healing professionals is that we are deeply empathetic and we care, but it is not empowering to clients to take choice away from them and make decisions as the clinician for the client. So having my boundaries in place means that I'm respecting my client's autonomy. I'm respecting their right to choose, even if I, in the back of my head, disagree with that choice. Should we need to modify or change the boundaries because something happened? It's an ongoing conversation. But at the end of the day, my job is my job and it doesn't define who I am, even though it's a huge part of my life. So I've learned to close the office door and keep that version of myself at work. I don't check email when I'm at home. I'm not thinking about the things I need to do the next day. My schedule can adjust and my schedule can wait. And my downtime is my recovery time. Because I work in domestic violence, it is that extra heavy load. There is a deeper consideration for folks who do this line of work. And if I am not taking care of myself, I am doing a disservice to my clients.
Yeah, I think that that is a really important factor to keep in mind. And as you've been kind of going through these different identities, there are so many things you do. And apart from being a clinician, apart from being an artist, you're also working on a grander scale in providing or in advocating for this type of care, this trauma-informed care and art therapy to be accessible to anyone, regardless of their demographic that they're in. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing to try to expand the reach of this service that anyone could benefit from.
Absolutely. There are states in the US that already see various forms of therapy, art, music, dance, and the larger therapies of social work, family, marriage and family therapy, licensed professional counselors. They see the work that goes into that and they give all of those professions a license so that individuals who work with those professionals know that this is somebody who has put in the time and the work and can actually help me on my healing journey. Where I live in Michigan, however, we have been working on getting art therapy protected and licensed as a profession for probably about 40 years without success. Part of the barrier that Michigan has is that we have a constitutional law that no profession can preside over another profession. So what that means is that even if you have a similar profession, like a licensed professional counselor, a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed social worker, or an art therapist, all who have their master's degrees, all who have done clinical internship and postgraduate supervision, we might be similar, but we all need to be licensed separately. It's a huge barrier to creating new licenses in our state. I have been advocating for licensure as the chair for the Michigan Art Therapy Association for going into my third year now. And it is challenging to navigate barriers to a system that you cannot change, but the work is worth doing.
Absolutely. That is like a massive challenge. You're dealing with not only like the 40 years of this, like attempting to be pushed forward, but also like the legal or justice system or the government in a lot of ways. That's really difficult. What would it mean for art therapists to be licensed, to be considered under licensure for the state of Michigan? What would that mean for clients and for art therapists?
First follow-up question, do you like statistics?
I love a good statistic.
Love
We
them.
are
Lay it on us.
evidence-based and ready for the numbers.
So in Michigan, we have a huge disparity between available professionals and those seeking counseling services. One of the things you said earlier, Emma, was that we all, as adults or young adults, tend to have incurred various traumas over our lifetime, both big T and little t. And I posit the idea that after COVID, we've all faced the real and perceived threat of death. Everybody has been struggling with their mental health. And in Michigan, there are roughly 200 art therapists. If an art therapist were to see a client using the client's insurance, we would be talking about 12 to 16 weeks of short-term brief therapy. A full caseload is 25 clients. We're talking all 200 art therapists get licensed in the first year of services. That's 6,000 individuals having access to mental health care that perhaps did not have access to their preferred form of health care. We could send somebody to talk therapy for years and they might make no progress, but you sit them down with somebody whose language they speak. And suddenly they're making positive change and growth. So in the first year alone, we're closing the gap by 200 providers and 6,000 clients served. Michigan is also losing therapists. We are seeing, especially the creative therapists, go to neighboring states that have these licensures and protections. So the field is actually dying out here, which is really sad. This is a wonderful field, and we have so much to share with our brothers and sisters in Michigan. And to say that I would like to see us stay and I'd like to see us grow, well, that's just 200 art therapists and 6,000 in the first year. If we stop losing our graduates and we continue to grow the fields, that's helping us close the gap more and more and more.
Wow. I mean, I think that everyone kind of responds differently to different treatment, right? Like even to a therapist, maybe like one therapist, their orientation works for you, but a different one works for you in a different way. And to close off such a huge chunk of care, I think is definitely concerning and something worth pointing to. It's just like art, I feel like maybe one person really does respond to oil painting, but then when it comes to, I don't know, ceramics, they're like, this is not my thing.
They don't like the mud.
Yeah, there's just endless possibilities for art. So why can't there be endless possibilities for receiving the healing that would help you?
Absolutely. Mallory, what would you say to someone who is maybe considering getting into your field, but might feel daunted by these changes or maybe the lack of access, right? Like thinking about grad students or undergrad students or maybe even high schoolers who are in the position of like considering art therapy or therapy in this way as a path forward in a career, but might see some of these changes in the field as like daunting or scary. What would you say to folks who are considering the path that you took?
That is a real lived experience of up and coming art therapists in Michigan. That is something that they have to consider because we don't afford them title protection and licensure right now. I've been able to practice in my home state for 8 years without a license because I find opportunities in the in-between spaces. I know that I'm clinically trained. I know that I have the skills. I know I could pop down to Ohio and grab a license if I wanted to. But there is something about digging my heels in and saying, I care about where I live and I care about the people who live here with me. And I want to see that change. I want to see this field become more accessible. And so for individuals who are considering it and see that as a barrier, join the fight. Fight with us. And for those who are perhaps hearing this in other places in the States or Canada, consider too that it takes one person to decide to become a therapist, become a counselor, and that one choice will impact thousands of people's lives. It is one of the most rewarding careers that I ever could have gone into, and I don't regret it a day in my life, even though it is difficult to stay employed in Michigan. I don't plan on leaving anytime soon.
Well, I think that is so brave to really and honestly so compassionate and just caring for your community. Because you're right. I think a lot of people are like, oh, if you're not happy, move. Well, why not you stay there and have them move and try to make changes right where you're at. I think that is something I think we can all kind of learn from and see what can we make better here versus just having to go to a place that's easier, more accessible.
Absolutely. Well, Mallory, thank you so much for chatting with us for this almost, hour together. I really appreciated getting to know about you and your art. And I think you've shared a lot of incredible advice and insights for our listeners and for me and Emma. We like to close off every episode by asking a couple rapid fire questions. So my first rapid fire question to you is, what Gamify value resonates most with you? Love, labor, learning, or loyalty?
Love. It takes a lot of love to do the work that I do. And that's something that I show myself and I show the people in my life and the people that I serve.
Wow.
Amazing.
Okay. I just want to also add that was not, no one edited that part. That was how quickly Mallory knew what her value was. Like that. I felt that when you said that.
So amazing. What is something that has brought you joy this week?
Ooh, it's early in the week. I am looking forward to, this is so funny. I'm going on a vacation with my grand little and my great grand little. We're leaving Friday to go to New Orleans. I am so stoked to be having one of our annual trips together.
I love that. The big little system within the sorority community is hands down one of my favorite parts, to have sort of that buddy, and that it's just really cool to see that continue.
Yeah. Also, what good timing that it's happening the same week that we're recording this. It's
That's kismet. that was absolutely kismet.
That's amazing. Okay. My next question for you is, what's something new that you've learned?
I just literally took so many continuing ed classes over the last week. Why did my brain go blank?
A lot of info.
Yeah, really. I think one of the most interesting things that I recently learned is that we're expanding our understanding of what trauma responses are. Most people are familiar with fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. We're discovering that there are more trauma responses, and people cycle through these responses as a means to cope.
Yeah, for sure. That is, I can't wait to follow up with you and hear them even more that we discover. Yeah, it is. I mean, we're so complex. How could the responses not be complex too? What is something you would tell your college self?
You will come into your line of work, not just because you needed someone to be there for you, but because you are a good therapist and you care.
That's amazing. What a profound thing. Your college self would feel a lot of things. Okay. What was the moment that you chose Gamify?
Oh gosh, like 13 years ago now. I knew that I belonged in my sisterhood when I was opening the bids at walkouts, and I looked in that bid bag and I saw the Gamify one, and I thought to myself, that's it, I'm home.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That bid day moment, seeing yourself in the letters for the first time, it really does hit different.
Absolutely.
What was one moment in Gamma Phi Beta that prepared you for where you are today?
There are so many. And I think being the standards chairwoman of Epsilon Beta was a weird segue, because you had to learn to navigate and help manage your sister's emotions to hold them accountable to themselves and to our values. So nobody likes being standards, but it was a really formative experience. And just having kind of that first interaction with helping individuals self-manage their emotions and navigate distress responses.
Very interesting. You know what? I've never heard that response to being standards.
No, nobody else has that response that I'm aware of.
There is something to be said for it, though, you know, like just peer-to-peer mentorship and accountability and support. But yeah, very, very cool. I'm sorry, Lex, you go.
Yeah, don't steal my question. How dare you, Emma?
Last one.
Last question. This is one of my favorite questions we ask. If you could nominate any person in the world for membership to Gamma Phi Beta, who would it be?
Dolly Parton.
We welcome you with open arms, Dolly. Get in here.
Gosh, sending her a bid in the mail today.
She's so fantastic. I just love Dolly.
She's just a cool lady.
I love her
Dolly.
Early childhood reading program. Like she's just fabulous. So Dolly Parton, I would love to extend you an open bid.
Well, thank you so much, Mallory, for all of your time and wisdom. We are so appreciative of everything you shared today. True and Constant is brought to you by Gamma Phi Beta Sorority. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider giving a gift to the 150th by going to gammaphibeta.org/150/podcast. Special thanks to our co-hosts, Mo Remus and Lex Stewart. Jessica Bujnowski for the True Connection segment. Our editor, John Haight, and executive producers, Megan Kruger and Shauna Wilson. Our theme music, Panko Breaded Pork Chops, written by Michael Thomas Gager, performed and produced by Mikey Gager. Thank you for listening.